Today, March 25th, also known as Tolkien Reading Day, where we celebrate the destruction of the One Ring of Power. And as for a Tolkien Reading Day, we read a little bit excerpt from one of his books. I've chosen from Fellowship of the Ring, The Fog on the Barrow Downs. At this point, Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin have wandered through the old forest and met a good spirit named Tom Bombadil. And from there, they journey on towards Bree and the Prancing Pony. But first, they go through the hills and encounter a fog bank. And it is there that we begin our story. Them going was very slow. To prevent their getting separated and wandering in different directions, they went in file, with Frodo leading. Sam was behind him, and after him Merry and Pippin. The valley seemed to stretch on endlessly. Suddenly Frodo saw a hopeful sign. On the either side ahead, a darkness began to loom through the mist, and he guessed that they were at last approaching the gap in the hills, the north gate of the Barrow Downs. If they could pass through that, they would be free. Come on, follow me," he called back over his shoulder, and he hurried forward, but his hope was soon changed to bewilderment and alarm. The dark patches grew darker, then they shrank, and suddenly he saw towering ominous before him, leaning slightly towards him, one another like pillars of headless doors, two huge standing stones. He could not remember having seen any sign of these in the valley when he looked out from the hill in the morning. He had passed between them almost before he was aware, and even so as he did, so darkness seemed to fall around him. His pony reared and snorted, and he fell off. When he looked back, he found that they were alone. The others had not followed him. "Sam," he called, "Pippin, Merry, come along. Why don't you keep up?" There was no answer. Fear took him, and he ran back past the stones, shouting wildly, "Sam, Sam, Merry, Pippin!" The ponies bolted in the mist and vanished. From some way off, or so it seemed, he thought he heard a cry. "Oi, Frodo, oi!" It was away eastward, on his left, as he stood under the great stone, staring in, streaming into the gloom. He plunged off in the direction of the call, and he found something going steeply uphill. As he struggled on, he called again and kept on calling more and more frantically, but he heard no answer for some time, and then he seemed faint and far away and high above him. "Frodo, oi!" came the faint voice out of the mist, and then trailed off into a long wail, suddenly cut short. He stumbled forward, and with all his speed he could towards the cries, but the light was now gone, and clinging night had closed around him, so that made it impossible to be sure in any direction. He seemed all the time to be climbing up and up. Only the change in the level of the ground at his feet told him when he was at last come to the top of a ridge on the hill. He was weary, sweating, and yet chilled. It was wholly dark. "Where are you?" he cried out miserably. There was no reply. He stood listening. He was suddenly aware that it was getting very cold, and that up there a wind had beginning to blow, an icy wind. A change was coming in the weather. The mist was flowing past him now in shreds and tatters. His breath was smoking, and the darkness was less near and thick. He looked up and saw with surprise that faint stars were appearing overhead amid the strands of hurrying cloud and fog. The wind began to hiss above the grass. He imagined suddenly that he caught a muffled cry, and he made towards it. Even though he was forward, the mist was rolling up and thrust aside, and the starry sky was unveiled. A glance above showed that he was now facing southwards and was on a round hilltop where he must have climbed from the north. Out of the east, the biting wind was blowing. To his right, there loomed against the westward stars a black shape, A great barrow stood there. "Where are you?" he cried, both angry and afraid. "Here," said a voice deep and cold that seemed to come out of the ground. "I am waiting for you." "No!" cried Bilbo, but could not run away. His knees gave and he fell on the ground. Nothing happened and there was no sound. Trembling, he looked up in time to see a tall, dark figure like a shadow against the stars. It leaned over him. He thought there were two eyes, very cold, though lit with a pale light that seemed to come from remote distance, and a grip stronger and colder than iron fear struck him. The icy touch froze his bones, and he remembered no more. When he came to himself again for a moment, he could recall nothing except a sense of dread. Then suddenly he knew he was imprisoned. Caught hopelessly, he was in a barrow. A barrow wight had taken him and was probably already under his dreadful spells of the barrow wights, about which whispered tales spoke. He dared not move, but they found him flat on his back upon a cold stone, with his hands on his knees. But through his fear was so great that it seemed to be part of the very darkness that was round him. He found himself at last thinking about Bilbo Baggins and his stories of their jogging along together in the lanes of the Shire and talking about roads and adventures. There was a seed of courage hidden, often deeply, it is true, in the heart of the fattest and most timid hobbit, waiting for some final and desperate danger to make it grow. Frodo was neither very fat nor very timid. Indeed, though he did not know it, Bilbo and Gandalf had thought him to be the best hobbit of the Shire. He thought he had come to the end of his adventure, and a terrible end, but thought suddenly hardened him. He found himself stiffening as for a final spring, but no longer felt limp like a helpless prey. As he lay there thinking and getting a hold of himself, he noticed all at once that the darkness was slowly giving way. A pale, greenish light was growing around him. It did not at first show him what kind of place he was in, for the light seemed to be coming out of himself and from the floor beside him, and he had not yet reached the roof or wall. He turned, and there in the cold glow he saw lying beside him Sam, Pippin, and Merry. They were on their backs, and their faces looked deathly pale, and they were clad in white. About them lay many treasures of gold, maybe though in the light they looked cold and unlovely. On their heads were circlets, and gold chains were about their waists, and their fingers were adorned with many rings. Swords lay at their sides, and shields were at their feet. But across their three necks lay one long, naked sword. From there, you will have to read and find out what happens to Bilbo, or Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin. Will they escape the barrow weight? We will find out.